Continuing Rebbe Nachman's explanation of the story of Rebbe Nachman, if they had not been still near their ship, when they got off the ship and got onto the island, there was a fish and upset the fish, and then the fish threw them off. If they weren't still near their ship, Okay, and then Rebbe Nachman explains it in the following way. He brings a verse from Yeshaya. It says, it's Hashem saying that for my own sake, and he says it twice in a row, I will act, meaning I will bring salvation to the Jews. So, besides for this being a sort of mysterious explanation, what does being near a boat have to do with Hashem saying, for my own sake, twice in a row? There are many Pesukim about salvation. Why would Rebbe Nachman choose one that seems so difficult to connect to the content of the story? Now, that's not the question I'm really going to ask, because Rebbe Nachman frequently brings explanations that seem far apart, and it's our job to analyze the text in such a way that we bring out what he wanted us to bring out. We do the mental exercise he wanted us to do, and therefore affect our brains and our consciousness in the way that he wanted us to do that. Rebbe Nachman Zal writes in Likutei Moharan that how do you make a drasha? You take two sources that don't seem connected and you figure out how they're connected. So Rebbe Nachman gives us lots of opportunities to do that. The question I'm going to ask is, why now? Every other explanation on this story so far has been basically clear. We can ask questions about details, but initially they make sense, unlike this one. I said before, they saw a fish in the sea. They thought it was an island, but they saw a fish. And Rebbe Nachman says, it was that represents a straightforward thing that it represents. The fish represents the tzaddik ador. Because fish are compared to tzaddikim. Here he brings a connection about how fish can be compared to Mashiach. And so, in the Marshal's explanation of the story, he says it's representative of when we went to Achashverosh's party in Purim times, and we thought this is Geula Shlema. That's the only reason we went to this party, and it wasn't. We thought it was an island, and it was actually a fish. Okay, and so the Rebbe Nachman just says, well, that's Bechinas Dariktor Mashiach. Okay, so this is a straightforward explanation. Before asking, we have to try to find a question. Then he says, the Yosef Lechalta Gabe, and there was sand on top of it. Hainu atefila she'anim is palpim al zeh shechaviyachol pana oref aleinu. The sand represents the prayers that we hope Hashem is going to turn His face and be favorable to us. Okay, so it's a direct representation. Yasvulei hainu v'aviu as hamishkan Moshe. That we parked our boat and got onto the back of this fish. And this represents bringing the pieces of the Mishkan to Moshe Rabbeinu. He could finally put them all together in the proper way and stand it up. And we could continue, but we don't really have to, because the point has been made that so far the explanations have been clear. And if you look inside, you'll see that until this point, I'll read the one just before it. Gabi et habich. And the story goes, we started cooking lunch on the back of the fish. It didn't appreciate having a fire in its back, so it flipped over. That's the story. Rebbe Nachman says, Hainu sheyith habech midas adin lemidas arachamim. He learns it in a nice way that it's when the judgment suddenly changes. There's a sudden upturn in our luck, and that represents the flipping over of the fish. Okay, so this is all a very straightforward representational. There's a one-for-one thing here. But this one, all of a sudden, doesn't make sense. What does the ship have to do with Hashem saying, for my own sake, for my own sake? Twice. I do have one other question. Well, there is one other question one could ask, but I'm not going to go there right yet, because it's a question that has been asked many, many times, which is, why does the Pasuk say the same word twice in a row? So we will take a look at least one of the popular explanations for that. But the Pasuk obviously is very ancient. It's over 3,000 years old when Yeshaya lived, so there are many explanations already on that point. So I'm going to attempt to answer the question, why does Rebbe Nachman suddenly change the style of his writing to be very vague and ponderous, where so far in this explanation has been clear. And that is to point out that both in the story and in Rebbe Nachman's explanation, something novel happens at this point. In the story so far, we've talked about, we saw a fish and it had sand on its back, and we parked our ship on it, but still we're talking about the fish. And it had grass on its back, and we thought it was dry. We're still talking about the fish. And we got off and we started cooking lunch on it, the fish, and then when it got hot on the fish, then the fish flipped over. And the whole time we've been talking about the other guy. We've been talking about the fish, so to speak. But then in the story, finally at this point, if we were not near our ship, this is the first time we've actually really mentioned our ship again. Where did we come from? What was our perspective that we wound up in that situation, parked on the back of this fish? And we have spoken about a number of thought patterns that we can sort of summarize as the double darkness argument. One being that we thought at the times of Achashverosh we had nothing to pray for, and so we didn't pray. So when someone has to pray for something, but they think they don't, this is called double darkness. Other similar pathologies, one being thinking that prayer doesn't do anything, or thinking that the subject of prayer is too great for me to accomplish, and these all prevent the person from praying, which is what they need to do to solve the problem. It's been about the thought patterns. It's been about the thing that can affect me, but it hasn't been about me, the reader, or me, the applier of this information so far. So this is represented in the story, as well as in Rebbe Nachman's explanation, that so far we've been discussing these various issues that could affect someone in prayer, misconceptions they could have that would cause them not to pray, and only now do we start talking about the prayer, the mitpalel. Now, I'm going to explain the question in two ways. That the word Safina, if instead is spelled with a samech, and the way you pronounce samech is you place your tongue at the tip of the top of your mouth by your teeth, and you blow air there. So you go tongue and then air. Samech. It could be also written with a tzadi, which is a very similar letter. Tzadi. You do the air and then you do the tongue. Tzadi. Yeah, so they are almost identical, these two letters. And the Sefer Yetzirah that breaks all the Hebrew letters into which part of the mouth is being used. It's saying that these are in the same grouping. We both use the tip of the tongue. Now the word with a tzadi means hidden. Safina is when we hide. There's a language in the Gemara that if we have a marpeset, we have a roof deck, and someone else has a roof deck higher than us, and they can look down on our roof deck. We don't know when they're going to come out, and so they are required to build some sort of a wall if we opt to make them do that, so that they can't see us from their roof deck, so that we don't have to mistafina every time. We don't have to hide. Safinta, mistafina. It's almost the same thing. So, in the story itself, we see that when we start talking about the ship, now we are not so clear on the information. We've heard all the Musar Haskil, all the good advice that's been given to us, proper attributes we should take on, and negative attributes that we should reject, and even ways of rejecting them. However, we have not done a lot of work on looking at me and how do I make myself actually do that. Right? It's very easy to give good advice. Don't become angry. But to actually not become angry is not as easy as just saying it. We should never worry about Gashmi youth, and we should always just trust in Hashem that He's going to provide for us. So that's very easy to say, but when someone has something that seems like it's worthy of being worried about, it's very hard to actually do that, to actually change someone's own heart around so that they don't do that. That's much more complicated. So it makes sense that Safinta would be a language of hiddenness. Also, the pshat of a boat is that it goes out to sea and you cannot see it anymore because it's too far out at sea. So that's why it has a similar language. Okay, and now it also, so that would explain why suddenly we're being mysterious, right? Because the word Safinta implies mysteriousness. It implies the dark cave of the heart. of the self. It's a dark cave specifically because it's much easier to look at the guy over there and what he's doing wrong than to figure ourselves out. Our eyes point out for a reason. Even someone who says you have an inner eye, okay, so you have one inner eye and you have two outer eyes. Okay, so the problem with that answer is that there's another answer that could explain the attribute of mystery when it says Lama'ani. For my sake, it sounds uncertain. It sounds like a stutter. Suddenly, now that I'm talking about myself and what attributes I need to take on, changes I need to make, I'm not so confident all of a sudden, not so professorial. So that would also explain the change of tone. The change of tone is represented in two ways: the word Safina and also language Lama'ani. So we have a principle in text interpretation. And it's going to sound like a way of reducing possible interpretations, but it actually is a way that forces us to come up with a novel interpretation. And the rule is that if we have a question, why is it written like this, and there are two answers, or more, any number greater than one answers that emerge from the text, this cannot be. If there are two interesting things that would suggest one interesting thing, but we need to have a one-to-one relationship. So we cannot explain Rebbe Nachman's sudden change of tone with both the language of Safina and Lama'ani. So which one are we going to look into to determine which one is the right answer? Our hand is sort of forced in this because up until Rebbe Nachman, we didn't have a lot of information on this story. We did have the explanation of Maharsha, which we've discussed previously, but Maharsha does not mention the change to talking about the ship. It seems that Rebbe Nachman has sort of noticed that in a novel way. There are other explanations in Ein Yaakov, but I don't recall them. Anyone's free to correct me if they come across an explanation that predates Rebbe Nachman that notices this. Clearly an explanation that the story suddenly changes talking about the ship, which it had not done prior to that, and then spoken primarily about the island or the fish. But what we do have a lot of information on, and by the way, even on Rebbe Nachman's explanation, the Torah's Breslov that is brought on the page of this book, which is a reasonably comprehensive, the Trufa, Otzer Hayira, Likutei Halachoth, a number of sources here. Chachma Tuvuna. This is sources all across the spectrum of Breslov writings. Eitzes Mavuros. All the different leaders of Breslov are sort of represented here, and none of them really seem to address this point. So we don't have a lot of information about this interesting structural observation that Rebbe Nachman has made in the story, that Safina suddenly changes the tone. What we do have a lot of information on, as previously stated, is this ancient statement from Hashem as recorded by Yeshaya Hanavi. Lama'ani essay. So let's look at the pasuk itself first of all. Lama'ani essay. Ki eich echal. For how could I let my name become degraded? And also that someone else should not become glorified in my place. So seemingly, even in the words of the pasuk itself, this question is answered clearly why Lama'ani is written two times. Now, there are a few other answers here. I'll look at one of them. Midrash Tehillim, it brings a different pasuk. Good is Hashem, and we will praise Hashem for He is good, for His kindness is everlasting. And we will say those who have been liberated by Hashem, that He has liberated them from sorrow. Tsar, it's also the same Samech Tzadi connection there. Probably the word sorrow is from Tsar, the Hebrew word. So now it's going to bring our pasuk in order to explain that pasuk. Yechol, right? Yechol. For my own sake, I will act, meaning to bring salvation to the Jews. For how can I let my name become degraded? It notes in the Midrash that it brings this word twice, which is strange. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Any also ela bisvil shemi shelo yitchalel. Hashem says, I'm just doing this so that I don't get embarrassed. But why does it say it twice? When you were in Mitzrayim, I rescued you so that the Egyptians would not say that they'd beaten the God of Israel. He saved them for the sake of his name. It's in a different pasuk in Tehillim. And also in the final Galuth, which is the current Galuth, Hashem is going to rescue us so that His name not become degraded. Okay, so very nice. So we see that past and a future. Just like I will bring you salvation and revelation in this world, this physical world, so too I will do in the spiritual worlds when you ascend beyond your physical body. Hashem doesn't stop there, and whatever challenges and opportunities someone faces in the spiritual worlds, Hashem will be there with them. This also is a language of past and future. America Health Capital Aleph, and like Shlomo Melech says, possibly giving a principle to understand his father's words. Ma'ashahaya hu sheyeh. That which was Hashem's salvation is what shall be. And therefore, it says it twice because it's talking about the past and the future. This also seems like a very passable explanation. And if you should ask, well, what about the rest of the pasuk? It says, well, lama. So why is Hashem going to rescue you in the past and the future? So that His glory not be given to someone else. So that part of it's strange. What about Hashem's glory not being given to someone else requires specifically a rescue in the past and the future? So to say that if someone were to make this thought mistake, to think that, well, one time Hashem saved me, but He's not going to in the future, well, that just sort of sounds like another Choshech Hafela argument, like another, I do need to pray, but I'm going to make some weird reason why I shouldn't pray, and so gives me 2 steps away from salvation. And if that's really what it's coming to teach us, another Choshech Hafela argument, that makes it the Likutey Moharan more difficult, because so we're saying the same thing we've been saying on the page so far. We've given various diagnoses of Choshech Hafela and reasonable treatments for them. That doesn't explain why Rebbe Nachman suddenly starts speaking in a mysterious way here. But the Midrash does not stop there. The Midrash then curiously says that the reason that Hashem rescues us in the past and the future is so that His glory not go to someone else. So to speak, that the glory first needs to be established before there's any concern that it goes to someone else. So once Hashem rescues someone one time, well, now they know it's a thing that can happen. And so now they know that if it doesn't happen in the future, now they can say, well, I do have proof positive that there is actually a God because He saved me the previous time. But apparently He doesn't care about me enough to do it in the future the second time. And therefore, I will have to go to someone else, as though there is someone else. Before they didn't know there was any concept of someone else. So within the Midrash itself, it isn't that difficult to resolve why 2 appearances of Hashem would be necessary to rule out but again, it still keeps us within this sort of a double darkness argument, that until the second salvation is brought, which according to a lot of the Torah and what we've read so far in this teaching, the salvation that we're looking for is one that is going to be prompted and enhanced by prayer. So we would have to solve the problem of double darkness in order to achieve this salvation at all, and go back to praying. So bringing me a double darkness argument again, it doesn't seem to resolve why the Likutey Moharan changes the way it's written. So one of the principles of learning the Likutey Moharan, upon which this sort of pro-edition of the Likutey Moharan is based. It's brought in the Bira Likutim, the rules for learning, the principles of drasha for learning the Likutey Moharan. There is an assumption that Rebbe Nachman knows every explanation that has been and will be even if you only say has been. I mean, what we just read is older than Rebbe Nachman, so obviously he was familiar with it. And more than that, he assumes also that we are going to look it up, and we could take what is the simple text of Likutei Moharan even without looking it up and get something out of it. But he knows that we're going to look it up, and he knows that we're going to have questions on it. He knows that we're going to take note of the fact that this is yet another double darkness sort of argument. And this will bring us a question on Yeshaya that actually this Likutei Moharan teaching comes to answer, because the way that this passage in Yeshaya starts, that's the very pasuk that we've been talking about. The idea that Hashem extends the ability to us to pray. This is a teaching that came up very early in this Likutei Moharan. So then we keep reading, and when we read this thing, Lamatani, that for my own sake I'm going to save you, and we read, why does it say double? And it seems like it's talking about this double darkness argument. Okay, but Hashem extended us the ability to pray, and yet now we're put in a position of double darkness where we're not going to pray, and salvation only comes about by means of prayer, and Hashem's very name is on the line here. So it almost seems like Hashem has really sort of set himself up here. This is the question that we could have on the text of Yeshaya. So Rebbe Nachman knows that we're going to look at this explanation of Yeshaya and see the double darkness argument that he's been talking about so far. But because he specifically makes a point of changing to an unclear explanation, I want to propose that he is coming to say that is not the explanation that I want to emphasize about these words. And so this returns us back to the previous explanation that the reason Rebbe Nachman changes tone is because of the word Safina, which indicates hiddenness, as in the finding answers within ourselves is much harder than finding them in the world around us. But then the only problem is that we still have Lamatani. Okay, so I'm going to propose a chidush on the pasuk in Yeshaya that perhaps is what Rebbe Nachman was intending when he brought it. He was intending for us to search for a different meaning, because it wouldn't make sense to keep talking about double darkness. For my own sake, I am going to act and bring salvation to the Jews. But the first time it says Lamani is the fact that I'm doing it for my own sake is for my own sake. In other words, to create a turning inward process. We have a problem of double darkness to deal with, and so we've been presented information, and so this is a first step. But we will also need to then apply this information to ourselves, and we will at some point need to stop the pure limud of the information and begin the application of the information in order to understand it, right? The classic analogy, if I just read a book about boxing but I never get in the ring, I'm not going to know very much about boxing, am I? I read a book about bikes and I don't actually get on the bike. So at some point I will have to put the book down and actually go on the bicycle. At some point I will have to actually perform the mitzvot that are written about in these texts in order to really understand what is going on with them. Even if you say, well, you take Rabbi Shimon, who was in the cave and he just learned the whole time, and Torah and he didn't actually do the mitzvot. Well, he did with his divine intentions. He knew what was supposed to be happening in divinity behind the mitzvot, and therefore he could do them in that way. So it isn't really different. And this is the point here in the story where you have enough explanations of double darkness. I don't need to go through every possible explanation of double darkness now. Now you have to just recognize in yourself there are many, many, many types of double darkness that could occur within a person. Rebbe Nachman has addressed 3 or 4 of them. And by doing so, he has given us the realization that, this issue of double darkness can arise. and with a little bit of creative thinking, and if I'm doing the learning of poskim like is advised in this teaching in Likutey Moharan, so in the way that we've learned it out, I should have ample brain power to do this, to overcome obstacles of the type of double darkness. Then it won't only be like a kitzur halachot sheet that I just read. Well, here's my guidebook here. Well, if I have the sniffles, then I take this pill. If I have a headache, I take this pill. If I have, because the problem with that is then if I get something that's not written on the sheet, then I won't know what to do. Rather, Rebbe Nachman has been demonstrating that you're going to learn these techniques to apply them to yourself, and you're going to do that so that you will develop the intelligence to generate responses to any sort of double darkness argument that shall come your way. And that's the second time that it's written, or really the first time that it's written Lamatni. So he's intending that we do a sort of a meta-learning. And so that resolves why there is the sudden change of tone in Likutey Moharan, to indicate to us that it is now time to stop talking about specific examples of the double darkness and to now extract a klal, a general principle by which we can render specific rulings. I had a teacher one time, we were learning the laws of marriage, and he said to me that if you want to remember specific rulings, the way to do it is to remember the reason. Remember the general, the overarching thing that has produced all of these individual halachot. And then you're going to be able to use your own sensibilities to do so. And this is also the way that my teacher, Rabbi Yol, taught us in Likutey Moharan. We didn't cover a lot of text of Likutey Moharan itself, but what he was imparting to us is the way to go about extracting information from the Likutey Moharan. And because there's in no number of classes could you really ever get through the entire book extracting information at a rate that we're doing, or that I was doing with him, which was we were going through the text more slowly than we're going in these classes. So this is one of the things that Rebbe Nachman wants to give to us, is the ability to learn things out. And so on that, Rebbe Nachman says that all of my teachings are introductions through which you can learn out any other matter. And on that, there's a Breslov explanation of what does Torah Sinister mean, what is the hidden Torah, and this goes with Safina, the hiddenness. That there is a classic explanation that Torah Sinister concerns matters like Sfirot, but we don't know what they are per se. And Torah Niglet, the revealed Torah, concerns matters like cows fighting. We do know what a cow is, but in Breslov, you don't really know what a cow is at its divine essence, just like you don't really know what a sphera is, so we don't necessarily buy that distinction so much, and we say rather anything that's written down in a book that has been revealed by some rabbi sometime, this is called Torah Nigla. It is revealed Torah, and it is upon us to study it. The writings of the Rizal are revealed. The writings of the Chabad Rebbeim are revealed. We can go read their books and think about them and come to an understanding of what they mean. And so what's Nisr? That is still that which is still hidden within you. That's why the story changes to talk about you now, you, the ship, who got in this situation. And Rebbe Nachman brings a pasuk with his double language, Lamatani, to return your Latani. Now I have to think about me, because this is the way that we will extract the Torah Sinister, and learning in this meta-learning sort of way, where I'm learning the information and how to get the information, is a method by which I can bring this Torah out.